Before diving into this incredible story, consider subscribing to the channel and hitting the bell. Every story here has something to say, and you won't want to miss a single one. The prince wanted to humiliate the waitress by forcing her to play, but her music amazed everyone. In Ashbury, a picturesque little town where time seemed to pass slowly, residents prepared each year for an eagerly awaited event, the Grand Charity Ball. Held in the sumptuous home of the Montgomerys, an influential and respected family for generations, the ball brought together local high society, patrons, artists, and sometimes prestigious guests from far and wide. That evening, the crystal chandeliers cast a soft light that made the rich red and gold drapes of the salon sparkle. The walls adorned with antique portraits seemed to tell 1,000 stories of glory and power. Amidst this sumptuous setting, the murmur of conversation mingled polite bursts of laughter with the delicate clinking of cutlery. But an imposing presence had just arrived, arousing curiosity: Prince Alexander Sinclair. Heir to a distant royal line, he was awaited with equal parts admiration and apprehension. At 29, Alexander was a man of undeniable charisma, dressed in a perfectly tailored tuxedo. His piercing blue gaze swept the room with confidence. Officially here to strengthen diplomatic ties between his country and Ashbury, he had a reputation as a prince of rigid standards and notorious arrogance. In a more discreet wing of the house, Grace Collins busied herself with a mixture of excitement and apprehension. 23 years old, she worked as a waitress at Café Willow, a small, simple, but welcoming establishment where most of Ashbury's residents gathered. That evening, she had been asked to help out at the ball, a rare opportunity for her, but also a source of intense anxiety. Grace lived modestly with her mother, Clara, whose fragile health required constant care. Daily expenses weighed heavily on her shoulders, and this job at the ball represented a breath of fresh air, a hope of a little more stability. But beneath her simple dress, a muted navy blue, a far cry from the dazzling gowns worn by the guests, Grace carried a secret she treasured dearly: music. Since childhood, her violin had been her refuge, her escape from difficulties. A gift inherited from her father, a passionate violinist who had tragically passed away a few years earlier. Yet, despite her talent, Grace had never dared to perform in front of an audience. Fear of judgment and shame at her humble origins prevented her from revealing this part of herself. As she poured a tray of champagne, her gaze met Prince Alexander's. His smirk made Grace shiver. He scrutinized her with a mixture of condescension and amusement, as if assessing the abysmal difference between them. "You, the waitress, do you play an instrument?" he asked in a cold, mocking voice, immediately attracting the attention of the nearby guests. The murmur in the room grew louder, and a few intrigued or amused glances turned her way. Grace felt a lump in her throat. She hesitated for a moment, but then nodded timidly. The prince, with a theatrical and provocative gesture, gestured towards the stage where an old piano and a violin were placed. "Then prove it. Come on stage and play for us." The entire room froze. Silence, heavy and oppressive, filled the room. This suspended moment seemed to tell Grace that this wasn't an invitation, but a trap meant to ridicule her. Silence fell like a heavy veil over the room. Every breath seemed to hang in the air, every gaze fixed intensely on Grace. Her heart was pounding, drumming in her chest like a pressing warning. She could feel heat rising in her cheeks, mixed with a dull, almost paralyzing fear. But beneath that fear, a tenacious determination burned deep within her. She knew the prince wasn't simply looking to hear music. He wanted to break her, to ridicule her in front of this brilliant, merciless crowd. Yet she couldn't back down. Not this time. Not for her mother, who counted on her every day, nor for herself, who had always dreamed of making her voice heard through her violin. With a deep breath, she forced herself forward. Her hands trembled slightly as she picked up the violin perched on an easel, a gift from a patron of the ball. The instrument, smooth and gleaming in the lights, seemed to be waiting patiently for her, like a faithful old companion. She closed her eyes for a moment, seeking refuge in her inner world. She saw herself again as a child, her clumsy fingers gliding over the strings, her face focused, the music like a promise of escape. Then she opened her eyes again and gently placed the bow. The first notes rose in the hall, timid, almost fragile, like a breath in the wind. A delicate melody, carried by raw and sincere emotion, unfolded. Little by little, the notes gained in intensity, becoming deeper, more powerful, like a torrent of soul that could no longer be held back. Grace played the story of her life, the pain of losing her father, the sleepless nights with her ailing mother, but also the faint light of hope and the invincible power of resilience. Each chord vibrated with a universal, transcendent truth. The faces around her began to transform. The mocking laughter faded, the frowns relaxed, and the eyes filled with deep emotion. Some of the usually aloof guests were visibly touched, while others stared in wonder, taken aback by the unexpected beauty of this young woman. Prince Alexander, until then frozen in a haughty posture, felt a shift within him. It wasn't just the music he was hearing. It was a call to authenticity, a quiet strength that swept away his arrogance like a mighty wind. He looked down, unable to bear this magical moment. This moment when appearance and status lost all power in the face of the purity of the soul laid bare by the music. In that room, truth had triumphed, and Grace, without even knowing it, had done more than perform. She had touched hearts, broken prejudices, and offered everyone a lesson in humility. As the piece ended, a sort of solemn calm pervaded the room, as if time itself had suspended its course to honor Grace's music. The final chord echoed, fading gently into the emotionally charged air. A deep, almost reverent silence enveloped the guests. Then, slowly, almost timidly, one hand clapped once against another, breaking the stillness. It was the beginning of an avalanche of applause. At first hesitant, as if the guests were barely recovering from the surprise, then growing louder, vibrant, and unanimous. The walls of the great hall echoed with the cheers that saluted the truth and beauty Grace had just revealed. Blushing with shyness, her cheeks burning with an emotion she had never known, Grace stepped off the stage. Each step was heavy with meaning, marked by a mixture of pride and humility. She felt the gazes now benevolent, curious, and admiring. Prince Alexander, who moments earlier had arrogantly challenged her, approached her, this time with palpable sincerity in his voice and gaze. "Miss Collins," he began with a slight bow, "you have reminded me of a truth I had forgotten. True power lies not in wealth, nor in the title one holds, but in courage, passion, and talent. You have lit up this evening with your music and your soul. Would you agree to play for me at my next official concert?" A murmur ran through the assembly. The guests, witnessing this unexpected scene, understood that something had changed, not only in the prince, but also in the very heart of this society frozen in its prejudices. In the following days, Grace's life took a turn she never would have dared to imagine. Invitations poured in from patrons, concert organizers, and even prestigious music schools. But more than anything, she found a newfound confidence, an inner strength that finally allowed her to believe in her dream. Prince Alexander, meanwhile, began a profound transformation. Touched by Grace's purity and sincerity, he decided to use his influence to support unsung artists and encourage cultural diversity in his region and beyond. For Grace, that evening was the beginning of an extraordinary journey. She became a symbol of hope and resilience, living proof that light often shines where you least expect it, that greatness sometimes lies hidden in the most humble simplicity.